works. Okay, so good evening. So it's a great pleasure and honor for me to be here tonight for the closing lecture of this series on dynamics of geopolitics in the Mediterranean. And I wish to thank the European Institute for the Mediterranean and the executive president and director for having invited me. A few weeks ago, 3 years after forcing their president from office, Egypt and Tunisia adopted a new constitution and completed the first phase of their complex transition process. Libya is still struggling to adopt its constitution. Elections to the Constituent Assembly took place in the end of February amid a deteriorating security situation and deepening political polarization. Morocco took a different path and prudently preferred to begin a process of reform to diffuse the risks of political rupture. In Algeria, the president undertook in 2011 to introduce amendments to the constitution to strengthen democracy. He set up a constitutional commission in April 2013 in charge of making proposals. The commission submitted its conclusion in September 2013, but since then there has been no follow-up, and the constitution will not be amended before the presidential elections. These transition processes to democratic rule in North Africa, all of them with their own specificities, have been marked by the political events of the last 3 years and by the role played by state and non-state powers. These constitutional drafting processes have been at the center of a struggle for power between executive, legislative, judicial powers, Islamists, secular political parties, and even the military, at least in Egypt. And the constitution has become like a ball tossed in the political game. In the first part of my presentation, I will try to make a comparison between these processes, and in the second part, I will develop the Egyptian case, which I followed more in depth than the constitutional processes in the other North African countries. Il y en a encore, il faut... Encore. OK. One more. OK. So we can make a distinction between the processes by focusing on the constituent body. Some of these bodies were elected, others were appointed by the executive power. In Tunisia, a constituent assembly of 217 members was elected by the people in October 2011, with the participation of more than 70 parties. And as you know, Islamist parties won a great part of the seats, in particular Ennahda, in this constituent assembly. The specificity of the Tunisian assembly is that it also worked as a parliament, enjoying both constituent and legislative powers, which may also be one of the reasons why it took so long to draft a new constitution in Tunisia, because the Constituent Assembly was also working as a parliament, not only as a constituent assembly. In Libya, according to the constitutional declaration adopted by the National Transitional Council in August 2011, the constitution should have been drafted by a constituent assembly appointed by the General National Congress. But under pressure from the opposition, it was decided in July 2012 that the Constituent Assembly would be elected, not appointed, and that it should be made of 60 members with parity between the country's 3 main regions. Each of the 3 main regions in Libya elected 20 representatives in this Constituent Assembly, and 6 seats were allocated for ethnic minorities. The elections to the Constituent Assembly in Libya took place on the 20th of February, so 2 weeks ago. Only individuals were allowed to present themselves as candidates, not political parties. The Amazigh minority boycotted the the contest because there had been allocated just 2 seats in the assembly, and they claimed that they accounted for at least 20% of Libya's population and should have been given more. There was a very low turnout in these elections, and voting could not take place in about 80 polling centers because of the lack of security. And 13 seats of the commission could not be declared because of the fact that the voting could not take place in a lot of polling centers. So those were 3 examples of constituent bodies elected by the people in Tunisia and Libya. Those were 2 examples, so with direct elections. In Egypt, the Constituent Assembly, the first Constituent Assembly, because in Egypt we had 2 Constituent Assemblies, one in 2012 that was elected under Morsi and which drafted the 2012 Constitution. And then the Constitution, as you probably know, was suspended in July after the removal of Morsi, and a new constituent body was appointed in September 2013, last year, and that constituent body, called the Committee of 50, drafted a new constitution, which is a constitution of 2014. So in Egypt we have 2 constituent bodies. So I will try always to make a distinction so that you understand which one I'm talking about. So now I will talk about the first one, the one which was elected under Morsi, so under the Muslim Brotherhood. So one of the more remarkable aspects of this constitution of 2012 is that it was the first time in Egypt that a constitution was drafted by an elected body. Past constitutions had been drafted by unrepresentative and unelected political elites. So this Constituent Assembly was elected on the basis of a constitutional declaration adopted by the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces in March 2011, so 2 months after the withdrawal of Mubarak, or 1 month after, because he withdrew in February. So 1 month after, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, which was exercising the power in Egypt at that time, adopted a constitutional declaration. And according to this constitutional declaration, the new constitution would be drafted by a constituent assembly made of 100 members. And these 100 members were to be chosen by the parliament. So it was not direct elections like in Tunisia or Libya. It was indirect elections. The people elected the parliament, and the parliament elected the constituent assembly. But still, they were elected, even though indirectly, but it was not, they were not appointed, they were elected by the parliament. So parliamentary elections took place in the end of 2011 and beginning of 2012, and the parliament, the newly elected parliament with an Islamist majority of Muslim Brothers and Salafists, met in March 2012 to elect a constituent assembly. So they elected a constituent assembly which was made mainly of Islamists. Since it was elected by an Islamist parliament, they elected a majority of Islamists in this constituent assembly. But 1 month after, in April, the State Council, which is the judiciary in charge of ruling on administrative regulations and decisions, so the State Councils declared unconstitutional this Constituent Assembly. So the Constituent Assembly was dissolved, and the Parliament had to appoint a new one, a second Constituent Assembly, which was elected in June. By the way, I will mention it later on, but this second Constituent Assembly will also be declared unconstitutional, but in June 2013. So 6 months after the Constitution will be adopted, the Constituent Assembly will be declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Constitutional Court, but I will mention it again later. So this new Constituent Assembly elected in June was the one which drafted the new constitution. So who was in this Constituent Assembly? There were 7 women out of 100 members, and 5 of them were members of the Brotherhood. You had about 60% of the assembly who were also members of Islamist parties, and the other members, about 28 of the other members were from liberal or secular backgrounds, and many of them withdrew from the assembly before it was adopted, before the constitution was adopted. They were complaining about the way the discussions were conducted in the assembly and the lack of information, and they were complaining that some articles were changed after consensus had been reached. So in the end, when the constitution was adopted in November 2012, there were almost only Islamists in the assembly to adopt the constitution. So this is for the third example of elected bodies. So now we have other ways to draft a constitution. In Morocco, the king, as I said before, succeeded in avoiding the escalation of protests to revolution by passing reforms while retaining control of the entire revision process. So the Moroccan king was very wise, and after the onset of demonstrations, after the first demonstrations took place in Morocco in the beginning of 2011, the king himself took the initiative to revise the constitution. So he did not wait until the demonstrations became too important, and he decided himself to amend the constitution. And he appointed members of a committee in charge of drafting a new constitution. So he could control the entire process because he is the one who chose the members of this constitutional commission. And the result of the work of this commission was a new constitution which diminished the powers of the king to the benefit of the government and the parliament, but in the end of the day, the king remains in the center of the political game, and the reforms have not affected the core of his powers. So he was able to give reforms without losing his power. In Egypt, the second constituent body was also a body appointed by the executive power. So after Morsi was removed on the 3rd of July, the interim president, Adli Mansour, adopted a constitutional declaration in July. And this constitutional declaration established a very innovative but not very successful process of drafting a constitution. So according to this July declaration, the constitution was to be, the new constitution was to be drafted in 2 levels, by a 2-level process. First, a committee of experts was nominated. A committee of 10 legal experts was nominated by Adli Mansour, and it was made of 6 judges and 4 constitutional law professors from Egyptian universities, all men. There was no woman in this committee of experts, so 10 men. So you see, liberals and the leftists complained about the 2012 Constituent Assembly that there was only 7 women out of 100, but they appointed a committee of 10 experts, and they could not find a single woman to sit in this committee of experts. Anyway, this committee of 10 legal experts was given a month to prepare amendments to be submitted to a second committee, which was a committee of 50 representatives of the society. So you had 2 levels. First, the committee of experts drafted a proposal, and then the proposal was submitted to the committee of 50. But in practice, I said it was not very successful because the committee of 50 did not show any deference to the work of the experts committee. They did not. They totally disregarded the recommendations of the committee of experts, and they started anew to draft a draft constitution. So this committee of experts was not really useful. They wasted a month for almost nothing. They could have started meeting a month earlier, and they would have had a month, an additional month. So this committee of 50 now. This committee of 50 representatives, they were also appointed by the president, by Adli Mansour, the interim president. And they were chosen so that they would represent the major components of the society. So you had the representatives of political parties, representatives of intellectuals, workers, farmers, unions and syndicates, national council, El Azhar, churches, armed forces, the judiciary, the police, the youth. So all these different components of the society were represented in this committee. And in practice, if we look at who they were, those 50 members, you will find out that it was a very establishment committee. 38 seats out of 50 were allocated to individuals representing institutions close to the state, including a large number of national councils and bodies that had been in direct confrontation with the Muslim Brotherhood, like the judiciary, the army, the police, El Azhar, churches. Leftist and Nasserist groups were represented by 11 members, and only 2 seats were allocated to Islamist parties. 2 out of 50 were allocated to Islamist parties. 1 seat was allocated to a Salafist from the Noor party, and the second seat to a former member of the Muslim Brotherhood who had resigned from the group the year before. So there was no Muslim brother in this committee of 50 representatives. And there were 5 women out of 50 members. So you see it's not much better than the previous one. So this committee of 50, it was like a photo negative of the previous Constituent Assembly. There was a clear prejudice in this constituent body against the representation of the Islamist trend. And Islamists claimed that they had been deliberately excluded from the political scene. Another example of constituent bodies we experience in these transition processes in North Africa, it's when the executive power itself exercises constituent power. So it does not even appoint a committee to draft a new constitution. The executive power itself decides that it has constituent powers, and it adopts constitutional declarations or legal texts that have constitutional value. And this was experienced in Egypt. And we have 3 such examples. I already mentioned them. So the first one is the Constitutional Declaration of the 30th of March 2011 that was adopted by the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. which was exercising power. When Mubarak left power, he gave the power to the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, to the army, which exercised power until June 2012, when Morsi was elected as president. So for more than a year and a half, power was exercised by the army directly. And in March 2011, the SCAF, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, adopted a constitutional declaration to replace the former constitution, to replace the 1971 constitution that had been suspended in February after Mubarak left power. But what was very strange in this constitutional declaration of the 30th of March is that 10 days before, on the 19th of March, so 10 days before, there had been a referendum to adopt amendments to the 1971 Constitution. So after the SCAF took power in February, they appointed a committee to amend the Constitution of 1971. And the committee had a month to amend the Constitution of 1971. It submitted the results of its work in the beginning of March. And there were about 10 amendments, mainly dealing with elections, that were submitted to referendum on the 19th of March. So amendments to the 1971 Constitution. And then 10 days later, suddenly, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces adopts a constitutional declaration which had been drafted in total secret. Nobody knows who drafted this constitutional declaration. And the constitutional declaration was not submitted to referendum, although the amendments 10 days before had been submitted to referendum. And the amendments were amending the 1971 Constitution. And the constitutional declaration was replacing the 1971 Constitution. So it was, legally speaking, it was a strange move by the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces to replace the 1971 Constitution just after having amended it. But the amendments were included in this constitutional declaration. So the referendum was not lost. The amendments which had been adopted 10 days before were included in this document. And this declaration was amended twice, in June and August, the year after. And so it was amended in June 2012 by the army, just before the army left power, because in June 2012 they left power, and because Morsi was elected. So just before releasing power, the army amended the constitutional declaration to increase its powers, because they were leaving powers to the president, so they increased the powers of the army in the constitutional declaration. But 2 months later, in August, after Morsi had become president, he amended again the declaration to abrogate, of course, the army's amendments. So he abrogated the amendments that the army had introduced in June, and he adopted new amendments to increase his own powers. So you see, when the executive power exercises directly Constituent Assembly, it can be very dangerous because they only think about their own powers. A second document which was adopted by the executive power is a constitutional decree, which Mohamed Morsi adopted on the 22nd of November 2012. So this constitutional decree was the beginning of his end. I mean, if you look at the why and how Morsi lost powers, most experts say it started with this constitutional decree of the 22nd of November, because it was such a violation of all the principles of democracy and the rule of law that he lost all the supports he had managed to win in the liberal, secular, and leftist parties. So this constitutional decree of the 22nd of November, so which was adopted directly by the president, by Morsi at that time, contained several provisions, but the most important ones was that he decreed in this decree that all his decisions will enjoy judicial immunity, meaning none of his decisions could be appealed before the judiciary. Normally, when a president adopts decrees or even decrees with the force of law, they can be challenged before the State Council or before the Supreme Constitutional Court. But in that case, he said, no, all my decisions will be immune from any appeal before any court. So meaning he could do whatever he wanted. There was no control on any of his decisions. And in this decree, he also fined the general prosecutor, although according to the law on the judiciary, the general prosecutor cannot be sacked. He's appointed, or at that time he was appointed until retirement. Now he's appointed for 4 years. But when he was removed by Morsi, the general prosecutor was appointed until retirement, but Morsi decided to remove him. And he also decided that the Supreme Constitutional Court will not be allowed to examine challenges that were pending before the Supreme Constitutional Court on the constitutionality of the Constituent Assembly. I told you before that in June 2013, the Supreme Constitutional Court declared the Second Constituent Assembly unconstitutional, but it was 6 months after the Constitution was adopted. In November 2012, already the challenge was already before the court, before the Supreme Constitutional Court. The challenge against the constitutionality of the Second Constituent Assembly adopted under Morsi was already before the Supreme Constitutional Court, but Morsi decided that the Supreme Constitutional Court will not be allowed to examine this challenge, so against the Constituent Assembly. And there was another challenge against the upper house of the parliament, and Morsi also decided that the Supreme Constitutional Court will not be allowed to examine these challenges. So you can imagine how the judiciary reacted to such decision by Morsi. It was the relations between Morsi and the judiciary were already not very good, but they became really bad starting from this decree, and the judges decided to strike, and they refused to sit in court for days and days, and it was, as I said before, Morsi lost a lot of his supports, starting from this constitutional decree. And the third constitutional declaration adopted in Egypt, I also mentioned it already. It's the one of the 8th of July. So just after Morsi was removed from power on the 3rd of July, the Adli Mansour, the interim president, adopted a constitutional declaration that remained in force until the new constitution was adopted in January 2014. And this constitutional declaration of the 8th of July was also drafted in secret. Nobody knows who drafted this constitutional declaration, and there was no committee appointed, no elections. Suddenly, on the 8th of July, he adopted this constitutional declaration. So this gives you an overview of the different constituent bodies that were solicited during these transitions in North Africa. I think it's important to underline the fact that both in Tunisia and in Egypt, it was the first time Islamist parties were offered the opportunity to draft a constitutional text and to set down their vision of society. It was the first time in Egypt and in Tunisia that Islamists, Muslim Brothers or even Salafists in Egypt could take part in the drafting of a constitutional text, because as I said before, in Egypt, the constituent body had always been appointed by the executive, and of course the executive had never appointed any Muslim brother in any constituent body. So it was the first time in Egypt, and it was also the first time in Tunisia. So, and it's important also, I think, to underline the fact that these Islamist parties, they accepted the principle of having a constitution, the principle of having a higher state norm that would be binding on all legal and political bodies. That's the meaning of a constitution. A constitution, it's the higher norm in the legal pyramid of norms. And it's a norm, a text which everybody should respect and enforce. So even Islamist parties accepted the idea that there was a constitution which was the higher norm and which would be binding on everybody, on all legal and political entities. And why is it important? I think because if we look at classical Islamic law, there is no constitution. I mean, in classical Islamic law, the meaning of constitution does not exist. You don't. In the model of Islamic constitutionalism, the law can only be the expression of the will of God. You don't have a parliament, you don't have elections, you don't have political parties, you don't have a state. So the very fact that Nahda and the Muslim Brothers and the Salafist parties took part in the drafting process shows that they agree in a way or another to enter the realm of democratic and constitutional legitimacy, and they accepted the rules of the game. They accepted that the norms and the constitution and laws be written by elected representatives of the people in assemblies, and that those norms, before, if we look at Islamic constitutionalism, they should have been established in mosques by Muslim scholars, but they accepted the idea of having elections, parliament, constitution, and so in a way they made concessions, at least in this regard. They accepted to play the same game as the other political parties. And in Egypt and in Tunisia, they even went further than accepting the rules of the game in Tunisia. And Nahda made a lot of concessions in the last draft of the constitution, which was adopted in last month or in January. And Nahda ended stepping back from rigid positions they had before regarding the status of religion and Islam in the constitution. And Nahda accepted to keep, to retain Article 1 of the Tunisian constitution the way it was written in the previous constitution, meaning Tunisia is a free, independent, and sovereign state. Its religion is Islam, its language Arabic, and its regime a republic. So they accepted to retain this formulation in the new constitution. And they accepted not to mention the Sharia. At the very beginning, they wanted to mention the Sharia in the Tunisian constitution. In the end, they agreed not to mention the Sharia. They agreed not to criminalize blasphemy in the constitution. Then they also accepted that women and men would be equal and not complementary, as they first wanted to state in the constitution. So, and Nahda did make concessions in Tunisia, and even in Egypt, in the constitution of the Muslim Brothers was criticized and as being a theocratic constitution and establishing a theocratic state. And the Muslim Brothers have been blamed in Egypt for refusing to make any concession when drafting the constitution of 2012. And it's true that there were more provisions dealing with religion in the constitution of 2012 than in the previous one or in the following one. However, if we look closer to this constitution of 2012, we find that the drafters, besides accepting the very idea of having a constitution, recognized in the constitution itself the main concepts of a modern democratic state. Si on peut passer celui d'après. And you have two provisions in this constitution of 2012 that I just wanted to mention to show that this constitution was not as bad as we can say, or it was said it was. Okay, thank you. So there were two provisions, Article 5 and Article 6, because we always mention the provisions dealing with Islam and the Sharia, but there were other provisions in this constitution, in particular Article 5 and Article 6. So Article 5, sovereignty is for the people alone, and they are the source of authority. The people shall exercise and protect this sovereignty and safeguard national unity in the manner specified in the Constitution. You would expect a constitution written by Islamist parties to give sovereignty to God. No, this constitution said sovereignty is for the people alone, not to God. And Article 6, I think, is even more explicit. So in recognizing the main concepts of a modern democratic state, the political system is based upon the principles of democracy and consultation, citizenship, under which all citizens are equal in rights and duties, multi-party pluralism, peaceful transfer of power, separation of powers, and the balance between them, the rule of law, and respect for human rights and freedoms, all as elaborated in the Constitution. Of course, it's just a Constitution, it's just a provision in the Constitution, but still, it is in the Constitution, a Constitution written by Islamist parties, by a majority of Islamist parties. So they, in the Constitution, accept the main tenets of the concepts of democracy and the rule of law and human rights and pluralism and peaceful transfer of power. So the Muslim Brothers made concessions, I think, in 2012, and the Salafists, as I said before, there was only one Salafist in the Committee of 50, so he was very isolated. And he also made concessions. Well, he had to because he was isolated, but he did make concessions, and he did not leave the assembly. He stayed until the very end of the assembly, and the Noor party said they were very satisfied with the constitution of 2014, and they called and they made a campaign in favor of voting yes to the new constitution, the one adopted in January this year. But the Salafists, the Noor party, who took part in the drafting process in the Committee of 50, first, when they accepted to engage in the drafting process, where they were the only representative of Islamic parties, they claimed that they accepted to participate in the drafting process to protect one specific provision of the Constitution of 2012, which they wanted to be included in the new document. And this provision they wanted to protect was Article 219 of the Constitution of 2012. And this Article 219, it was a new provision which the Salafists had managed to include in the Constitution of 2012. And that this Article 219 was giving the definition of the principles of Islamic Sharia. What was the meaning of principles of Islamic Sharia? because in the Constitution of 2012, and in the previous one and also in the new one, there is Article 2 in the Constitution which says that the principles of the Islamic Sharia are the main source of legislation. The principles of the Islamic Sharia are the main source of legislation. And this Article 219 was giving the definition of the meaning of principles of Islamic Sharia. And it was giving a definition by making recourse to highly technical notions of theology and traditional Islamic law, whose exact meaning only a few insiders were able to grasp. So nobody really understood what Article 219 meant in the Constitution of 2012, but what was understood was that it was giving a very broad concept of the concept of principles of Islamic Sharia. And the Salafists, they wanted to keep this Article 219 in the new Constitution. So when they first accepted to participate in the Committee of 50, they said, okay, we participate because we want to protect Article 219 and make sure it will be included in the new Constitution. Then after a few weeks, the representative of El Noor in the Constituent Assembly said that, okay, he would accept the removal of Article 219 if Article 2 was amended to state that the Islamic Sharia is the main source of legislation, not the principles of Islamic Sharia. So he wanted Article 2 to be amended to state Islamic Sharia is the main source of legislation, meaning for him, by removing the principles of and keeping only the Sharia, we were giving a broader place to the Sharia, because all the Sharia was the main source of legislation, not only the principles of the Sharia. So they say, okay, we remove 219, but we amend Article 2. This was not accepted by the Committee of 50. So a few weeks later, in November, the Noor Party said, okay, we remove Article 219 and we keep Article 2 the way it is, but in the preamble of the Constitution, we give a definition of the principles of the Islamic Sharia in the preamble. At least the preamble will give a definition of the meaning of principles of the Islamic Sharia. In the end, the Constitution of 2014 was adopted without Article 219, which was removed, without amending Article 2, who was kept the way it was before. The principles of the Islamic Sharia are the main source of legislation. And it's true that in the preamble you have a definition of the meaning of principles of the Islamic Sharia, but the preamble says that the principles of the Islamic Sharia should be interpreted according to the definition given by the Supreme Constitutional Court. And the Noor Party, in 2012, when they included Article 219 in the Constitution, it was by mistrust against the Supreme Constitutional Court, because the Supreme Constitutional Court had given a very narrow interpretation of the word principles of the Islamic Sharia. It had given a very modernist and liberal interpretation of Article 2, meaning the Sharia had no real legal effect in Egypt because of this interpretation by the Supreme Constitutional Court. So, in the end of the day, the Noor Party, they lost everything. I mean, they did not get Article 219 in the Constitution. Article 2 was not amended. And okay, in the preamble you have a definition of the principles of the Islamic Sharia, but it's the definition given by the Supreme Constitutional Court, which the Salafists until then contested, and they were not happy at all with this limited interpretation that had been given by the Supreme Constitutional Court. But still, the Noor Party stayed until the end in the Constituent Committee and voted in favor of the Constitution. And other provisions were removed from the Constitution of 2012. For instance, a provision, Article 4 of the Constitution of 2012, was giving more power to El Azhar. And this provision was removed in 2014. A provision which was prohibiting insults or attacks against the prophets or God's messengers was also removed in the new constitution. But still, Al-Nour said it was fully satisfied with the new text, and there was no problem with the new constitution. So you see that even the Salafists, they made concessions to stay in the political game. Two state powers in Egypt played a very important role in the drafting process. Two other state powers played a very important role in the drafting process of the new constitution. The first one, it's the military. The army. No, the one before. Okay. Okay, thank you. One of the biggest controversies surrounding the writing of the new Egyptian constitution concerned the status of the army. This new constitution, as we will see, enshrines autonomy to the military, which has already been granted a privileged situation in the previous constitution. Prior to the revolution of the 25th of January 2011, the military enjoyed a significant amount of privileges within state and society. But the constitution was silent, or mostly silent, on its status, leaving the matter to be determined by law or custom. The 2012 constitution codified a number of those practices and was criticized for giving considerable powers to the army and for entrenching them deep within the legal system. When the Muslim Brothers drafted the constitution of 2012, another critique, apart from the question of religion and the Sharia in the constitution, was the fact that it was giving too much power to the military. It was another critique made by liberals, secularists, leftists in Egypt, that it was giving too much power to the military. But if we look at the new constitution, the one drafted by these liberals, leftists, and secularists, they maintained the privilege given by the previous constitution to the military, and they even strengthened them in the new constitution. There are three main provisions dealing with the privileges of the army in the new constitution. The first one is about the budget of the army. The constitution of 2012 had stated for the first time that the military's budget was only to appear as a single figure in the annual state budget law, meaning the army's budget would not be made public. It would just be one line and with no details. It was the case before the Constitution of 2012, but it was not in the Constitution. For the first time, this was stated in the Constitution explicitly. In the Committee of 50, which was in charge of drafting the new Constitution, there was a representative of the army in this Committee of 50. And the military representative in the Committee of 50 insisted on maintaining the same language in the new constitution. And he managed to convince the other members of the Committee of 50, because the new constitution, so the one adopted in January, did maintain the secrecy the military has over its budget. So the budget of the military is still not transparent. And its economic activities in Egypt, the military has a lot of economic activities in different fields. They not only defend the territory, but they also have very important economic activities. And these economic activities are not under democratic monitoring. They are still not under democratic monitoring in the new constitution. The second provision, giving privileges to the army, it's the question of military trials for civilians. In the 1971 constitution, the previous constitution, in force until 2011, the matter of military trials was left to legislation. There was nothing in the constitution dealing with the right of the army to try civilians. It was not stated in the constitution. So the 2012 constitution, for the first time, provided that civilians could be tried in military courts for crimes that harm the armed forces. So, according to the Constitution of 2012, civilians could be tried in military courts for crimes that harm the armed forces. In the Committee of 50, many members at the very beginning said that they were against military trials for civilians and that they were ready to completely ban subjecting civilians to military trials. So several members of the Committee of 50 that drafted the Constitution of 2014 said at the very beginning that they were against military trials for civilians. But here again, the military representative in the Committee of 50 insisted on making an exception for civilian attacks that harm the armed forces. And the military representative said that removing military trials for civilians from the Constitution would undermine the army's status. There were long discussions within the committee between the members and the army in closed sessions, of course. And in the end, the new Constitution kept military trial for civilians. They made the provision a bit more explicit by defining crimes that harm the armed forces. So they gave a list of the crimes that are considered as harming the armed forces. And so they gave a specific list of kinds of cases to be submitted to the army. But still, the language is so broad that the military courts are still likely to have jurisdiction whenever they wish. In particular, military trials can be used or could be used when dealing with anything belonging to the armed forces. And I said before that the armed forces have a lot of economic activities. So in Egypt, the army owns clubs, hotels, petrol stations, wedding halls, theaters, or whatever. So all these places belong to the army. So if anything happens in a hotel or in a club that belongs to the army, it will be submitted to military trials. And the military prosecutor himself said that petroleum stations owned by the army would be under the jurisdiction of the military court. So if you go to a station and you fill your tank and you have a problem with the employee that fills the tank, you may end in the military court because the station belongs to the army. The third privilege given to the army was about the Minister of Defense. The Minister of Defense in Egypt has always been an officer. So even when it was not in the constitution, de facto, he was always a military officer. But for the first time, the Constitution of 2012 provided that the Minister of Defense had to be an officer. Here again, the Constitution of 2012 was criticized. How can you give such a privilege to the army? But the new Constitution, the one adopted in January, kept the same provision, so said that the Minister of Defense must be an officer, and it added something new, which was not in the previous Constitution, that for 2 presidential terms, meaning for 8 years, because a presidential term is 4 years, so for 2 presidential terms, so for 8 years, the choice of the Minister of Defense will have to be approved by the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, meaning the President of the Republic will not be able to choose whoever he wants as a Minister of Defense. He will have to be approved by the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. So if he chooses someone who is not approved by the SCAF, that person will not become a Minister of Defense. And this is a new provision that was added in this constitution. So as you can see, the drafting process of the 2014 Egyptian constitution and the current transition government in Egypt shows a developing role of the military in politics. In effect, the military is no longer treated as part of the executive branch of government, but rather as a branch unto itself, with very few, if no, checks on its authority. So the army has more and more power, and there is no check on its authority. The other and last state power which I wanted to mention is the judiciary. The judiciary now, also I will say a few words about El-Azhar. It's the last, the judiciary and El-Azhar. There's another one. Okay, thanks. So judges in Egypt, we saw that there was a conflict between judges and the Brotherhood for a lot of reasons, in particular the constitutional decree of the 22nd of November. But judges under Morsi, under the Muslim Brothers, have been accused of taking political decisions against Morsi and against the Brotherhood. And they have been accused of strongly supporting the military takeover from the Brotherhood. And the judiciary, if you look at the new constitution, it's true that they won a lot of autonomy in the new constitution. The new constitution gives a lot of autonomy to the judiciary. For instance, they will receive their budget in a lump sum. The general prosecutor will be selected by the Supreme Council of the Judiciary. Before that, the general prosecutor was appointed by the President of the Republic. Now, he will be selected by the Supreme Council of the Judiciary, meaning by judges themselves. The Supreme Constitutional Court will be allowed to appoint itself its Chief Justice. So the President of the Supreme Constitutional Court will be appointed by the members of the Supreme Constitutional Court themselves. Under Mubarak, the President of the Supreme Constitutional Court was appointed by the President of the Republic. The laws on the judiciary in the new constitution, according to the new constitution, the laws on the judiciary will need a majority of 2/3 of the parliament to be amended. So it will be very difficult to amend the laws on the judiciary. You will need a majority of 2/3 of the parliament. And if the independence and autonomy of the judiciary increased in the new constitution, no mechanism for controlling the judiciary was established, apart from the Supreme Council of the Judiciary, which is the only body allowed to sanction judges. But this Supreme Council of the Judiciary itself is made of judges. So they live in a kind of autarcie. So the judiciary will be able to govern their own affairs, appoint their own members, select their own leaders, and spend their budgets, free of any control from the executive and legislative powers. It's very good when you have a judiciary which is really independent and impartial, but when you have a judiciary like what is going on in Egypt, which seems not to be that impartial, it's a problem. For instance, since the 3rd of July, a lot of Muslim Brothers and also now the young bloggers and revolutionaries have been jailed following decisions of the judiciary. and no policeman and no members of the army has been persecuted by the judiciary for having killed in 2011 during the revolution of 2011, and also what happened last year in August in Egypt. There's no policeman, no police officer, no member of the army has been jailed or even brought to the court for what they did. The last state actor I wanted to mention was El-Azhar. El-Azhar, as I said before, the Constitution of 2012 had included a controversial article requiring El-Azhar to be consulted on matters related to Islamic Sharia. This provision had been included in the previous constitution under the pressure of Salafists. So the Salafists in 2012, they really struggled to include this provision, giving more power to El-Azhar, and according to which El-Azhar had to be consulted on matters relating to Islamic Sharia. This provision was removed in the new constitution on the request of El-Azhar itself. So El-Azhar did not want to be consulted on matters related to Islamic Sharia. El-Azhar preferred not to be granted a political role, which could be used by others for their own political ends, as had been the case with the Salafists. And El-Azhar's current leadership prefer moral authority over and autonomy over political powers. And El-Azhar was granted also autonomy and a special budget in the new constitution. They managed to increase their autonomy in the new constitution. And also El-Azhar, there were 3 representatives of El-Azhar in the Committee of 50, and they managed with El-Nour representatives, so there were an alliance between the 3 members of El-Azhar and El-Nour representative in some cases. And they managed in having some provisions not amended, in particular regarding non-Muslim minorities. There had been proposals in the Committee of 50 to extend to all non-Muslim minorities the privileges given by the Constitution to Jews and Christians. The Jews and Christians in the Constitution of 2012 and also in the new one, they have the right to apply their own legislation in personal status. So in divorce and marriage and filiation, non-Jews and Christians have the right to apply their own personal status legislation. And regarding freedom of religion, Jews and Christians are given freedom to practice their religious rites and to establish places of worship. But this is limited to Jews and Christians. And in the Committee of 50, some members wanted to extend these privileges to other non-Muslim minorities, Baha'i, Buddhist, or whatever, Jehovah's Witnesses. But both El-Azhar and El-Nour claimed that they were against such amendments and that it would lead to disturbing public order and undermining the pillars of the Egyptian society. And in the new constitution, these rights, as before, are limited or restricted to the divine religions only, meaning Jews and Christians. So other non-Muslim minorities do not enjoy more rights in the new constitution than they did in the Muslim Brothers constitution. So to conclude, a constitution should be a compromise document that reflects the interests and powers of the different actors in a societal context. It should be an instrument for creating not only an institutional framework for governments, but also a political consensus around a vision of the shape a given society will take. In Egypt, the two constituent assemblies had an opportunity to create new governing institutions, to define new rules of the political game, and to establish a new political order. Tunisia succeeded in making compromises and in adopting a constitution on the basis of a national consensus. But in Egypt, all steps taken to amend or write new constitutional documents were done under the control of a dominant political faction without the participation of other groups. Rather than a consensual document, product of a negotiation or a common understanding between political forces, the two Egyptian assemblies were motivated by a desire to protect narrow interests rather than to design a credible plan to achieve a democratic future for the country. The constituent bodies themselves were divided into segments and sectors, each pressuring the constituent body to satisfy its individual needs rather than thinking of the good of the nation. So let's hope that Libya, which is in the process of drafting a new constitution, Algeria, when the new president is elected and if he still wants to amend the constitution, and also in Yemen, it's a bit farther, but Yemen is also in the process of drafting a new constitution. So let's hope that Libya, Algeria, Yemen, and other countries, they will learn from these experiences and that they will follow the Tunisian steps rather than the Egyptian ones. Thank you.